There.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone to our second to last seminar series. Diane's not here yet, but she has in fact accused me of counting down the number of seminars left, and she might be correct about that. So I will tell you that next week will be our last for the, don't worry, just for the semester. We'll start again once spring semester starts. But next week will be Horacio Duarte speaking about modeling for maternal to child transmission of HIV. So make sure that you all come back for that. Other than that, the only other announcement that I have before we kick off today is that we are in the phase where we are planning for the spring semester. And one of the reasons I think that our seminars are going so well is that we have input from you. We need your help in helping us guide what's important to you, who you would like to hear from, what topics you would like covered, or what discussion you would like to have for us as a division, and also us as a community in the School of Public Health, as well as public health in general. Because as we know, especially for some of our more hot button topics, we've been getting hundreds of people attending, thankfully, thank you, Zoom, for that. But we have opportunity to have discussion on important topics in public health. So I encourage you, I have sent out to our division an invitation with a link to suggest speakers, topics, or just general discussion points. And I'm more than happy to follow up and get those on our schedule for this year. So I encourage you to do that. Before I start with today's introduction, let me begin with our way of acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relationships with our tribal nations. We acknowledge that these words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for our American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community. So with that said, I'd love to introduce my colleague, Ellen Demereth. Ellen received her PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania and is a professor of epidemiology and community health here in our School of Public Health. She's conducted field research in Papua New Guinea for 2 years. Unfortunately, she won't be speaking about that today. Where she learned the local language and has always wanted to get back to field research. And her work is at the interface of nutrition, human biology, and child development. And she seeks to understand how maternal and early life nutritional factors alter health trajectories across the life course. Her current studies focus on maternal nutrition and gestational diabetes in shaping human breast milk composition and on nutritional indicators of neurodevelopmental outcomes in preterm infants. Dr. Demereth has published over 200 peer-reviewed articles. And her work has been continuously funded by NIH since 2005. Since 2013, she has directed the University of Minnesota's Driven to Discover research facility, an innovative community outreach program that supports a wide range of human subjects research involving over 10,000 community participants each year. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Ellen. Ellen came to us by way of nomination, so that's why these nominations are important. I appreciate your acceptance.
Thanks so much, Ruby. Total pleasure to be here today and talk about something that I don't get to talk a lot about. And sharing screen, which is our work at Driven to Discover. So yes, I'm just going to launch right into this, and there will be some quizzes for you about the fair, just so you know. Okay, so just a little overview for this talk. I'm going to actually kick it off with sort of the big context of research funding and higher education today, and why it's so important that we need to have innovative research infrastructure. Then I'm going to go into the evolution of what this facility started as and has now become, a little bit about putting on the show and what we do each year, indicators of our success, and then I'm going to end with the work that we've been starting on scaling this out to rural Minnesota. So first of all, I want to make the point here and go through some data that I think you're all probably familiar with because of your lived experience, but I'm just going to sort of point out some of the economic factors that are driving our research infrastructure needs. So generally speaking, I think we can all agree that we've heard that diatribe that, governmental funding, state funding for higher education and public universities has been a bit stagnant, and in some cases has even declined. So what I have shown here is state support for higher education in dollars per full-time equivalent student. Now, these are adjusted for inflation. The university-wide is in the dotted line, and Minnesota is in blue. So what you can see is back in 2000, we were about 7,500 on average per student across the country. And then that declined pretty steadily and then hit a big cliff during the Great Recession. It's bounced up a little bit, but it's never quite recovered. Okay, and then you see also a lot of variation across states. Hawaii invests almost 15,000 or more per student per year, whereas Arizona has really never recovered from the cliff and is only about 2,500. So the point I'm making here is just that, we can't look necessarily to state governments to support us. They're barely giving us enough support to keep up the teaching mission. The research mission is something that we've got to do elsewise. And so what we do is generally think about federal grant funding because that has the biggest impact on our bottom lines. And so, many of you are working with NIH funded projects. Doesn't come to any surprise. They're dang hard to get. This gives the picture of the number of applications. There was this huge doubling of the number of applications back in the early 2000s. And then, but they sort of kept, they have increased. So in other words, the red line there is that success rate or proportion, and obviously that tanked for a while, and it's been pretty steady. Okay, but you can just see that literally the success rate being on average about 19% is really, really challenging. Okay. Secondly, I wanted to point out that there's been a lot of concern over early stage investigators as the age at the first R01 level grant, which is kind of considered the staple large research grant that oftentimes dictates your success in the tenure promotion and just general sort of impact in science. And so that there's concern, right, that age at first R01 has increased, especially for MDs, but definitely also for PhDs. So concern about early stage investigators and giving them resources that are going to make them successful in this very difficult and challenging competition for resources for their research. And then just to say, this is a pet peeve of mine. I'm sure it's all of yours, but it slays me that when I was a postdoc and working with faculty back in the 90s, I know, how is it possible that I could possibly have been, but the cap for the R01s was exactly the same, 500,000 per year. And we were maxing out those grants back then. We were like, oh, how are we going to get it in 500,000? But we had just teams of people to do lots of data collection and pay participant stipends generously and all of this stuff. Go to conferences. I feel like that's one of the first things I've taken out of some of my grants are those conference trips. Oh, we could, because we've got to get more interdisciplinarity and more innovation. And so we're putting a lot more of those resources into things like assays or things like consultants or things like, innovative work that requires the input of lots of different people on your team. And so that's our buying power now for that 500,000. In $1998, 500,000 today, that's about 250,000. We're having to do more with less. So that's the context for the evolution of our idea to try to build a high contact, high throughput health and social research infrastructure at the Minnesota State Fair. All right, so a little history here. I don't know if you, anyone know when the first fair was held in the state of Minnesota? Besides Annie?
I'll say 1905.
Earlier. even earlier than 1895.
1886.
It was 1859, which was just the year after the state became a state, and it had been a territorial fair. So, you know, because we were a territory, so they had territorial fairs, and they kind of circulated around. The very first one was held in what is now downtown Minneapolis, but it wasn't a downtown yet. It was still mostly grass. And so it really is, it came up with our state. Some interesting features. So it binged around a little bit. It was first, I think, yeah, it was in Minneapolis, and then it binged around to some small places, Owatonna and Rochester, and for a number of years, the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis would say, oh, we want it to be in our city, you know, and they were sort of duking that out, and no one could come to agreement. And then Ramsey County offered up this tract of land where it is now in 1885. And so that was the first time that the fair was held at this particular location. You know, fairs and festivals have, going back to Middle Ages, probably have been places where people come together, enjoy themselves, but learn about new things. So agricultural fairs go back for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so what would be happening in the 1890s would have been makers of combines or various agricultural implements would come and show off their wares and try to tractors, right? And have farmers say, oh yeah, I'm gonna buy that next year, right? But it was also learning about seeds, and it's continued to be like that. So genomic changes and new seed crops and things like that, seed varieties. So there's always been a little bit of a learning aspect to fairs and agricultural events like that. And the Minnesota State Fair is amazing. They are the top fair in the country in terms of per capita attendance. So we have we rock, as we always do in Minnesota, right? And so for this, we definitely rock. We have the largest state fair by capita, routinely on the jumbotrons, where there's the state fair conventions, and Jerry Hammer, who's our director, just recently announced his retirement. You know, there's a pause in the room when he gets up, because it's like, what will the oracle tell us this year? You know? So we are very much known as running an extremely innovative, safe, fun, clean, and impressive operation. So that's the background to our state fair. Oh, anyone know it's been canceled 6 times, so it hasn't been held 6 times in that 150 years. Anyone guess reasons why?
World War II.
Yes, twice. COVID 3.
Influenza?
It wasn't influenza, it was polio. For some reason, I don't know if influenza didn't strike Minnesota as hard, I don't know. And then the other one was the Chicago World's Fair. That year, I forget what year that was, it was overlapping with our fair. And so our fair didn't want to compete with the Chicago exposition, because they thought everyone's going to go to that. So it hasn't been canceled very much. And I want to just make my first call out to Dr. Logan Spector. This was really his baby, his idea. I mean, he loves the fair. So he's a faculty member in pediatrics. I'm sure most of you know him. He's on our PhD program. And he loves the fair, and and he saw the picture, you know, he saw what's on the right hand of your screen, right? Teeming throngs of individuals. And he's like, we can do research there. We should do that. And so we think about this as our special sauce recipe. Take a Big Ten university, add 2 million fairgoers, mix gently, and it should make a really huge research opportunity. Proximity to the fair also makes it doable, right? So the state fair is contiguous with the St. Paul campus of the university. And then we have the transitway. So most state fairs are not that close. There's usually more separation. So we are fortunate in that. And I think that's one reason why this model works very well for us. You know, so like at the end of the day, we can get equipment and materials on and off campus of the fair pretty easily, right? So people with biospecimens can grab their specimens and go right to their lab in very short time. So, origin story, right? So, Logan came to me in probably 2011. Was like, hey, you do genetics of growth. Let's do a genetics of growth study at the state fair. And I was like, what is that about? And he's like, no, it could really work. It would be great. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. And so we kicked off something called the Go for Kids study, which was a study designed to look at genetics of childhood growth and cardiovascular risk like blood pressure. We collected saliva on site for the DNA extraction. Fun fact, at the fair, you're going to get lots of different colors of spit. Slushies, slushies. We were appalled and also amazed at the spectrum. We had a picture, actually, it was a rainbow, literally, of Roy G. Biv, you know, of spit. And we one of our technologists did an analysis of the DNA yields across the different colors. And as it turns out, red has the worst DNA yield. It's significantly lower DNA yield. So just for any of you who know, want to do DNA extraction from saliva, try not to have people do slushies right beforehand. Anyway, so we had some fun with that. But the thing that really struck us was that we were at the Crossroads building, by the way, so we didn't have our own building at that time. We were in the Crossroads building, which is that building in Dan Patch, where, you know, the sports teams have their paraphernalia and their speakers, and, you know, the U Relations sort of hosts some spaces for different units. So we got a nice big space there, but it was astounding. We were only able to be there for 6 hours a day for 6 days, so 36 hours. And in that time, we enrolled 600 families. It was unbelievable. And Logan and I looked at each other like, okay, this definitely should go forward. And so on that, in 2013, we put together an Office for Vice President for Research, or OVPR, Research Infrastructure Investment Grant Proposal, as RII. Those are super great if you're interested in putting together. They are pretty nice. The thing about them is they require a match. So you do have to have quite a group of people together that want to go in with you. But we put together $200,000 with between the match and OVPR to kick off something that would be standalone. Part of that work was to get a memorandum of understanding between the University of Minnesota and the State Fair Board. That was necessary. And that's we're coming towards the end of our 10-year MOU, which we'll renew, I hope. But funny thing, this is where we were assigned. Okay, so you don't, I don't know if you know, but the fair has unbelievable power. Like we vendors, and we're vendors, by the way, we're considered vendors there. You have no like say in anything. They're like, and you shall have this space and you shall be thankful. You know, they do not broker any you know, opinions. And we're like, oh, but it's just this rundown, and it's kind of over on the dead side of the fair by the education building. And you know, in our minds, we're like, oh, we want to be over by the midway, you know, where there's all these people. Actually, they were wiser than we were, because this space by the education side actually is better for when you think about like in recruiting individuals who actually are going to be doing it for the right reasons, as opposed to being drunk and over by the midway and like, hey, whatever, I'll do a backpack, you know. You don't really want that, you know. We want to be in an ethical space here where people are actually consenting, and they know what they're consenting to. So it's actually a good location. The thing we ran into is that people love spam in this state, and they were mad. Exceeding, like we had people coming in for 2 years. What'd you do with spam? What'd the university do with spam? Like, what did you do to them? And we don't know. They just left. They left the building. We rebranded it. And you know, there's all kinds of folks from the EPI who were really into this. And you know, I want to give a shout out to Bernie Harlow. He was very excited and interested in this, as was Liz Hinsk and John Peterson and many others here in the division and also in the school. So we got a lot of good support. So I want to make sure that everyone's aware about that. So in this period, I call it our development phase. So we open up, we kicked it off in 2014, but there was a ton of work that went into just simply, you know, I called it my dog and pony show. Logan and I went to over 20, if not more, departments, faculty meetings. This is what we're doing. What do you think? You know, I mean, we were out there. I was lecturing. I was like, in trying to get folks excited about this. And it was a really neat opportunity to see different faculties and sort of hear what their research interests were. So that was pretty educational. And then the biggest thing in this phase was that we not only tried to get faculty and students, other investigators interested in utilizing the building, but we also were simultaneously lobbying the higher level administration and research at the time, President Kaler, his new Vice President for Research, Brian Herman, and the Council of Research Associate Deans. We made lots of presentations and tried to push this idea, Logan and I did, for an investment in a building. I mean, Spamville was awesome, but it was not ADA. It had a terrible slope, so it wasn't ADA compliant. It kind of leaked when it rained, not good Wi-Fi. There were issues. So we were able to obtain that $550,000 capital investment in this building. During this phase, we asked, it was a kind of a neat collaboration with the School of Design, where they had students who developed ideas for the design for the building as one of their projects for one of their courses, which was really neat. Design students don't know anything about the prices of things, though. So they had these really like wild, cool ideas, and they were riffing off this driven to discover idea. And so, you know, they had ideas of like kind of ship's prows, and that's a little bit where that element came from of the roof. You wouldn't believe the cool stuff they had, but then the builder went and had to price them out. There wasn't one building that was less than like $3 million. You know, and we're like, oh, okay, that's not gonna work. So, you know, but it was fun, and Logan and I and others were enjoying. I mean, it was a really cool experience to learn about how the university does things with building and construction. So we spent some time on that. That was also a phase when we went to an ISO model, or an internal service organization, which allows us to have a financial sort of space for the revenue and expenditures for the facility. And that was, you know, really spearheaded by John Peterson, and now Sarah Sharma is our accountant and keeps us moving in the right direction on all of that. And of course, Liz Hinsk has been amazing. She has been such an advocate. I mean, the whole accounting team has been, and so we really want to sing your praises on that. But that was also an interesting thing. I hadn't started an ISO before, and that was interesting to think about how you price your product for internal sales. So our primary goals, before I get into the details on what we do. So really what we want to do is bring university research to the people, into the public sphere, right? When we think about investment, we hear things from legislators, for instance. What's the purpose of higher ed? Who needs a college degree? You can actually make more money being in the trades, a lot of people. What is the value of college education, really? And so there's this kind of questioning, I say right now, about what we do and who it's for and why it's important and why we need to invest in it. And so I think that bringing our research more into public sphere helps, because a lot of folks think that research is only test tubes and white coats and kind of behind a curtain. So that's one major goal. Another thing, of course, is for our investigators to have a fast and efficient subject recruitment platform. with access to a general population, to support student and early stage investigators to have quick turnaround research, like for pilot studies, et cetera. And also when you've got people from different departments in the same room together in kind of a fun, wow, we're in this together sort of atmosphere, you do start to see some cross-institutional and intersectoral research happening. Now, this is the part where Annie should really be giving this talk, because Annie is the manager of the building and has been so for quite a number of years now. And so she knows this better than I do, but I'll just do it on, and you tell me what I get wrong. Okay, Annie. So again, our mission is to have a turnkey facility. What does that mean? We're trying to remove the barriers to research participation for Minnesotans, and for investigators, we're trying to increase efficiency and diversity. So what we provide is this permanent location. That's the biggest thing, is that there's this permanent location you can come to every year, plan on it, know it's there, plan in advance, get your team ready. So that's the biggest thing, honestly, it's just this permanent location. But each investigator will get approximately a 10 by 12 research bay. We invested in fiber optic cable so that we have excellent Wi-Fi in the building. We provide iPads for questionnaires and consent form completion. So investigators set up their own RedCap or Qualtrics. And so it's all done on iPads. We provide admission tickets for the staff, all the little tables and chairs, whatever, anthropometric equipment, refrigerator, freezer, signage, marketing, technical assistance. So we kind of help investigators just go and do it. They don't have to think about a lot of those things. And so right now is when we release our RFA, our request for applications for the building. So if you haven't already heard, it's January 17th is the deadline. So we'd like you all to think about possible ways you could utilize this. And so what really, our pace really starts ramping up in the spring, when we have to start scheduling and staffing and thinking about the IRB submissions. And then of course the summer is insane. So I just want to point this out. This is a nice little feature. We have a dedicated IRB representative named Clinton Dietrich, and he and his team have a dedicated little research panel that is focused only on reviewing the applications that are coming in for D2D, because it's a bit unique, right? I mean, there are ethical questions about, are you actually getting to informed consent? And so you have to make sure that, so the IRB panel is familiar with what we do. And so we're really helping the investigators make sure that they're using best practices at an annual boot camp for informed consent purposes. All the research there is human subjects-based research, which is why that's important. And again, we can do biospecimen collection there. We've done blood, hair, nails, saliva. So that's feasible. And then every year we're doing productivity and impact assessments. We're tracking our publications, presentations, grants, student dissertations. We help investigators with their dissemination through invitation of various media outlets, television, radio. Some of our investigators are on the television, on the radio every year. So it's a nice aspect of dissemination for our investigators. And so, yeah, I think I'll turn now to our what's been happening in terms of enrollments, because that's the biggest thing from the researcher side, right? 2014, our first year, we had 32 studies. We have a people counter. So we have a way of counting how many people come in and out of the building. And it's risen up until 2019, at the point we were getting almost 60,000 people in the building per fair, which is insane. But if you've been there, you can understand why. I mean, it's kind of just osmosis. There's this large mass of humans, and then they just kind of automatically end up into different buildings. So they get in there, they circulate, and the number of enrolled increased dramatically as we got our new building, which was super exciting after 2016. 2016 was also a little bit of a dip in the in the participants enrolled in the studies, that was the year we instituted the charges. So before that, we were on a grant from the Vice President for Research, so we were paying, we weren't charging any of the investigators at all. It's kind of like, ooh, will this work? And we're like, yeah, this will work. Okay, now we got to do the ISO. And so that year we started charging. But as you can see, it didn't really impact too much because the value was there for the researchers. And then COVID. So 2020 isn't even on here. And you can see this a little bit clearer here. We were doing great, very excited. The lower bar is, the number of enrolled participants each year. And then 2020 isn't even on here. And then 2021 was a half. We were constrained to 50%. I want to say something about COVID is that was a super hard thing for us at D2D to think about. Were we going to come back in 2021 or not? Right? It's that thing, I think, that existential thing that a lot of people have when they are in charge. Like I'm sure Diane has those things, it's like, when are we coming back in person? When are we going to expect everyone, in the office, at least part of the time, that kind of thing. And we had that. And there was this moment, I remember walking and I was on the phone with Marizan Ramirez. I was like, Marizan, should we do this? Should we not do this? What does Michael Oakes think? He was at the time the vice president or interim vice president for research. And, it was just like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Are we creating a super spreader event? We came to the idea that we were not creating a super spreader event. If the super spreader event was going to happen, it was going to happen because people were willingly coming to the fair. But we were going to have the safest possible location. And Annie worked with environmental health and safety at the U, and she can talk about that. I mean, immense effort went into making sure that that building had great ventilation, better than ever before, spaced out everyone had N95s. I think we did a great job. And in fact, Craig Hedberg in environmental health sciences did a small study of COVID in that building where we were asking everyone to get tested, the staff who worked there. And we only got one COVID positive from that whole fair for everyone who was tested. And I can't remember the proportion that actually went ahead and tested. It was a high percentage. And so we felt very proud that we did it, but it's those kinds of things that, I don't know, I'll just say it's challenging. And so here's our most recent statistics. We had 50,000 visitors, 45 studies. We consented and enrolled more than 16,000 people during that single fair. So just to give you an idea, we have shifts of 6 hours, a shift in the morning, a shift in the afternoon. You can expect on average to enroll for questionnaire type studies, about 134 adults or 41 youth every shift. And so that makes the average cost about $13, given our structure of fees. And our PIs tend to be extremely satisfied, including these folks who are interested in your earwax. So that's another biospecimen I forgot. Yes, they're also collecting earwax. And we have a broad user base across the entire university. We even have some external partners, different universities. MDH has been there. St. Kate's, St. Thomas, St. Scholastica, UMD, University of Wisconsin, River Falls, numbers of other ones I'm not remembering. And most of the studies are health science studies. 60% from the medical school, public health also a large proportion. So here's a selection of some of our school public health and epi studies. So Joe Gogler's work, Hedberg, Nicole Basta and her grad student had put together interesting work and interest in influenza vaccination interest. Anyway, we've had a lot of Ruby Wynn also, of course, has been there and it's going to be there again, I hope, this coming year. So we are also very proud of the impact that we've had, where we survey the investigators every year. And we're continually asking them to send us the papers and the updates. So far, 21 funded grant applications, over 100 articles, 2 manuscripts in review, posters, conference presentations, and students have had over 30 dissertations and theses. So that's really important, right? We want to see that the benefit is actually hitting the people who most need it in early stages. Investigators are definitely there.
I think the one thing I would add there, Ellen, is those are the publications and the grants that we know of. We know we are severely undercounting. You know, we have to rely on either when I've got extra time and can like Google search, you know, and see if there's a new article, or if people get back to me throughout my solicitation, you know, for, oh, did you publish anything from Fair? So it's hard to know really how many, but this is a severe undercount, I think.
Fair. Here's one we just, I think got 2 days ago. So here's a publication in JAMA Network Open from PEDS, Dr. Michael Pitt and his team. They went to, this is the 2021 State Fair, and they were, you know, surveying people about their understanding of common medical phrases, like your test was negative, your test was positive, or, you know, what does that really mean, right? Because generally negative is a bad thing, right? And so things like that. So how many people are knowing what we're talking about with medical jargon? Okay, in the last few minutes, I just want to go into this scaling out. So I hope I've convinced you that we're doing a pretty good job in terms of interest of state, you know, Minnesota residents. Their interest in coming and participating in research. But one thing we've noticed is that 75% of the participants are from the metro area. And so we are concerned about that because we have, you know, it's part of that thing about making our case that the university is relevant. And I would argue that there's an ongoing narrative about how state resources are centered on the metro and people out in greater Minnesota aren't accessing them. I'm not sure that that's necessarily always true numerically, but it's certainly a big perception. And so this is another example. Oh, great. You have this cool thing the university does, and it's centered in the metro. What about us? And so that's really important, especially for health science research, well, all research. There's a lot of very disturbing rural urban disparities in Minnesota, including opioid usage and suicide and healthcare costs and access to healthcare for our rural residents. But we don't have much of a university footprint, frankly, outstate. When we went this summer to Bemidji, and I had my maroon and gold on, we always do that, right? And it's got the big gold M, and I walked into Verizon because we were having issues with Wi-Fi. I'm like, what's going on with our Wi-Fi? You know, so I just walk into a business. This is in Bemidji, okay, it's a pretty big city. The guy looks at me, he's like, Michigan? And I'm like, yes again, and he came up with like Montana, and I'm like, okay, how about the state you live in? This maroon and gold M, that's Minnesota. So that and many other things that I heard this summer made me realize, and others know this as well, you know, a lot of people in greater Minnesota don't really know about University of Minnesota, and they don't certainly see much of a relevance to their lives. So, and Annie was very much involved in driving this work. I think it's a passion of hers, and so I want to make sure she has a chance to talk about this too. But every year there's County Fair's annual convention, who knew? And so we went there and pitched the idea, set up a kiosk at their convention in the vendor area. And we talked to over 40 county fair boards, 20 of which were interested in hosting our research at their county fair. We also pulled our investigators in our Rolodex and out of 94 respondents, 94% of them expressed interest in recruiting there. So we're like, awesome, we got this. We even identified particular possible events. We chose 5, depending on their area, their interests, their capacity, right? So all around the state, we chose 5. And we're like, we've got this. Let's put together another. Let's go back to our Office of Vice President for Research. And we got a nice crew of collaborators to, to match. But we failed. And I was really surprised because I'm like, this is mission critical for the university to be in Greater Minnesota, I would think. Also, we can do this. We've shown track record. And this is not very much money. and the critique slayed me, but it was like, this isn't infrastructure. This isn't infrastructure was one of the critiques. I was like, wow. So anyway, that's how I think of it. I think of this as infrastructure, but that didn't necessarily sway the reviewers. So we didn't get that, but you know what? We had that matching funds already organized, and we asked them, and almost all of them said, sure, keep our $5,000, do the pilot, go for it. We want our investigators to try it out. And so we did. And so I'm just going to quickly go through with what we did this summer, and Annie can follow up with more. And so obviously our outcomes are, number of rural residents enrolled at the events, researcher satisfaction, and county fair board satisfaction. Okay, so this was a big lift. Okay, and Annie did it. Everything she does for the state fair, she had to do 5 times in unknown circumstance. She did site visits, met with people. One of the places she met with, they didn't literally show up. She drove all the way to
Cass County.
Cass County, which is way the heck up there in the middle of the state there. Shows up after driving all the way up there. The person she was supposed to meet about the venue just literally didn't show. So anyway, information, right? We're learning. But we were able to take the building. For example, I was at the Bemidji building is on the upper right. And that's our colleague, Grant Anderson from UMD Pharmacy. He's a great advocate for it. But anyway, that building was unbelievably filthy. And so I spent with Debbie, where's Debbie, right? I mean, we spent hours cleaning that nasty inside of a shack. It had nothing been done. I think there'd been a 4-H group that used it. And it was just, I'm like, I cannot believe I'm doing this, but this is sort of cool. I mean, in a way, like I kind of like that. So that's the thing I like about this work is that it's very real.
But even when we were cleaning, we had a lot of looky-loos.
A lot of people in there were like, what you doing? What are you doing? Oh, research, that's cool. So it was fun. It was a lot of work, and Annie did the large share of that. So we had 22 studies. Notice Morris and Duluth and Crookston. I think the university really underutilizes the network of campuses around the state. I mean, yes, they're primarily teaching institutions, but those faculty have tenure and have research, maybe sometimes smaller scope, but not always. Certainly UMD has a ton of research. And why aren't we working with them more, right? We could expand the impact of our research by doing that. So we were really happy to see those folks come on board. The medical school, SPH, and CLA were well represented.
I think that was also an enormous draw for when we were out in Greater Minnesota, that the Morris people wore their Morris shirts and the Duluth people had their Duluth shirts, and people from Bemidji went to the Crookston crew because that was what was the most familiar to them. That was, I think, key to our success, was to have the other campuses involved.
Agreed. Yep. The other thing I noticed is that extension is what people identify with the university as. I mean, a lot of people don't know that there's any difference, that extension equals the University of Minnesota, which I thought was really interesting. And I saw that when like the interviewers, like for the newspaper, they're like, oh, from you're from extension. I'm like, I'm not from extension, but that's, yeah. So I think extension should be a good partner with us as well. actually, 10,000 families can speak to some of those collaborations. So I don't want to belabor this. I want some time for questions. This is kind of like the main thing we were going to look at was the enrollment. Okay. And you know, different fairs gave us different amounts of time, but Fillmore Fair, literally, we were there for 5 hours. We got 73 people. Okay, that's not great. That was our lowest yield site. It also was a site where they just had us out in a tent. It wasn't a building where we had lots of signage, et cetera. So anyway, it varied, but we were pretty amazed at, if you think about, you know, people say about D2D at the state fair, well, you know, it's really, you know, a small percentage and certainly not representative of the entire metro area. True, but when you're out there in these more, these smaller communities, state or county fairs are really quite highly attended. It's sort of the most interesting thing happening in some of these counties, just to say, I mean, at that moment, it really is. And folks just come after work and it's definitely a place people hang out. And so what you can see, I calculated the percent of the whole county population. And this is a pilot study. I mean, we could do so much more and be there longer and better. And also tell people in advance we're coming more. When you think about in Rock County, you know, we had 4% of the entire county who enrolled in a study. I mean, that's kind of impressive, I think, if you're thinking about public health or population level work. So we were actually quite pleased with that. And if you count up how much it cost us, the cost per participant is about $16 per participant. It's a little bit higher than the state fair. So you can imagine there's, you know, not as much of that, you know, scale issue, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think we could perhaps think about this as a option for people to deploy this through D2D in the future. Investigators were mostly satisfied. Some were not. Some were not because it was hot. Some were not because they didn't see the numbers they wanted to coming through. What was the other reason? Was Annie?
I think some Wi-Fi issues.
Wi-Fi issues, definitely.
Those people that responded not so satisfied, they did recognize, however, that they felt like having a multi-year experience at these venues would be beneficial because people would become familiar with us. People didn't know what we were doing, you know, that kind of having that repeated exposure, say over 3 years or something, perhaps would improve things over the course of, you know, enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we do need to fix the Wi-Fi problem. And that's not something we're going to be able to sync fiber optic all over the state, right? We are not going to do that. But what we could do is get a mobile unit with access and sort of do it that way. So also the Fair Board they were really excited about it. Very, very great people. And they are looking for innovation in their state fairs, okay, or their county fairs. It's really something they're interested in. And we got lots of great press. At one point, we were deployed in 2 separate fairs across the state at the same exact time and getting really nice social media uptake. So again, you know, I believe in our University of Minnesota, and I think we should be out there and doing this. And I think it's quite interesting that we in the School of Public Health are pushing this. I think it's a point of pride. And I really am thankful for everybody who has supported that. The medical school has also been very supportive. We're hoping that we can keep it moving forward. And I'll end this little part with a case study. So again, I mentioned Dr. Grant Anderson and also Kathy McCarty, who's in the med school at UMD. They are interested in vaccine hesitancy in the rural populations of Minnesota, right? We know this to be a fact. Folks are like, COVID vaccination, no thanks. But getting into that, what are the issues? What would be good news they would be interested in as far as information? All of that, they were interested in that. And in 2021, they went with some colleagues from local public health to 4 fairs, and they did it on their own. They got only 75 participants enrolled in their study. They were parked way the heck out in the parking lot, you know, that kind of thing. Then in State Fair of 2021, they also deployed their stuff. Sure, they got a lot of respondents, but only 100 of them were from the rural areas, which was the population they were most interested in. right? So then in 2022 with us, they came to 4 rural county fairs again, but this time they got 450 enrolled participants. So it might be a little bit more expensive, maybe it's a little bit more work, but if you're interested in rural population, you can't do it at the state fair. And it's hard to do it on your own because, well, you know, we spend hundreds and hundreds of hours getting it set up for you, right? I mean, investigators aren't going to be probably able or willing to sort of figure all that out. And why do it a million times over if we can just do it one and done? So summary, yeah, so I think that we can all agree that it's research costs are high and it's super hard to do innovative research, especially human subjects research with the funding that we have generally. So we need to invest in critical areas to increase infrastructure and innovation and try to expand to underserved populations. Our model is efficient, it's unique. As far as I know, this is the only such model in the country. And it could be expanded not only to fairs and things like that. I mean, imagine we could have, if we had a mobile unit that was actually administered well and staffed, we could be at large employers around the state. We could be at schools. We could be lots of places where we as public health researchers want to be. It has a potential, I think. We've been invited by the CTSI to potentially put in, if the CTSI here is funded, to put in like a methods project as part of the CTSA system. They have these hubs, and we're hoping to put in an RC2, which is like a research infrastructure grant, to build this out even more. I don't know if it depends on if they choose us to be one of those partners. I hope that goes forward. It would be great. Okay, so I'm done. I want to, again, Annie, she's gonna talk to you more, and Annie has been the heart and the soul of D2D for the last 3 years. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. I mean, yeah, so it's you. And Logan, he wanted to be here. He's flying back from Munich today, but he was the initiator and is our best front-facing person. I'm not much of I don't like the camera, but he loves it. So, so it's really good on the television. I want to definitely thank again our accounting and finance group, Liz and Sarah. Thank you so much. Jeff, who is back in his office now, has been amazing, and every year is helping us get set up with all the iPads and all the other technical issues with information technology. Clinton, Tracy, General Manager Jerry Hammer and his team, our funding partners. And yeah, so there I'm done, and happy to take any questions or comments from the group. I see that there is one chat question, looks like.
Ellen, as you're pulling that question up from the chat, I just want to tell you the story about Goldie Gopher on the left. So this was at the Rock County Fair. So this is Laverne, Minnesota, which is the most southwest county of the state. In fact, we had to stay in South Dakota when we were there. And I traveled out there in May to have a site visit, see the facilities, and talk with the fair board. And there were a couple of fair board guys that I met with, and we were sitting in the office, and it was kind of a crusty old guy who sat with his arms crossed the whole hour. That I had a different slide deck. I was telling them all about what we were going to do, and I was all excited about what we're going to do. And he just sat there and didn't ask any questions. And finally I finished, and he looked at me and he said, "What is it that you want to do at this fair?" And so I started all over again. I had driven 4 hours to be there. And well, if you want to come out here, you're more than welcome to try it, he said. So we were, touring the facilities, and I got back on the road. And so I got out there then at the end of July. we're setting up our booths and he comes over and he came over every day of that fair, 3, if not 4 times. He was my best friend by the end of the fair. But all of a sudden, it was the Thursday of the fair and he comes over to me and he kind of gets real close and he says, you know, when you were here in May, I really thought about what you had to say. And he said, I went to the doctors in town and I told them about this because there's Sanford Health is a big clinic in Laverne. And I said, the university is coming to the fair. You're going to pay for Goldie Gopher to come to the fair. And they did, he said. So all of a sudden Goldie Gopher comes out of his changing room and like all of us were like, oh, we took a photo with. Anyway, this man turned out to be like the biggest champion of what we were doing. He was bringing people over. I've already received 3 requests from this fair already to know if we're coming back next year. Like, cool. That was the impact of my little story about Laverne, Minnesota. Like this really, it just really worked. It was so fun.
Questions. Can I just read the one chat thing from the room, and then this is Amanda Thomas, who I worked with and we all worked with over the summer, and she's on. Hey Amanda, hope you're well. So I'm just going to read, Amanda, what you wrote. She loved working with. So Amanda Thomas is a PhD student in epi, and she's working with Logan's group in cancer epi. She's like, the rural county fairs, in my opinion, should definitely continue in addition to the state fair. They had a completely different demographic to research participants and not as well represented. Also, rural counties are those in which research is often foreign, so it gives a good face to research. I certainly think the rural county involvement will grow. So thanks, Amanda. Yeah, you were awesome. Thanks for coming on board. And then Lily was just saying, I love the Goldie story. Okay, so let's see. So Heather, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, 2 things. First, a comment about the county fair, which was a brilliant idea because we do need to get out there. I would be concerned if there's not a return, because that's a bad luck. Oh, they pop in, they leave. And you know, for 10,000 families, it was almost more about brand awareness than actually recruitment. And when we go back a second time, people will feel familiar and enroll. So if you need help pitching to the higher ups, like it's a bad look if we don't go back. And I think that message needs to happen. And then I understand there's a problem with them shutting off the bathrooms when it's not during the fair. I feel strongly that that needs to be a resource year round. We're really running into a problem. People don't want to come into Minneapolis. They're scared. And so the parking is easy. Everything is easy, except apparently the bathrooms. So I don't know if now with the change in leadership at the fair, that might be possible, but I would be happy to be an advocate for that as well.
Yeah, Heather's talking about the state fair facilities. And the other thing about the building though is it has no heat. So I think we could get into shoulder season, September, early October, maybe May, June, certainly July. Yeah, that would be great if we could do that. Ryan.
Congratulations, first of all, to you and the whole team. I mean, doing something like this in such a hugely bureaucratic place is next to impossible. I don't know how you did it in less than a decade. It's incredible. I had 2 questions. First of all, the finance, you mentioned something about revenues, and I'm wondering where you actually make money in this. And the second is representativeness, 75% from the metro. I think it's more like 50 to 60% of people live in the metro. So clearly geographically, it's not representative, but who actually goes to the fair? I'm a fairaphobe, kicking and screaming once in my life, stand in the beer garden until we leave. And so who actually goes there and how representative is it of the metro at?
Yeah.
Everyone except you.
Yeah. We'll get them sooner or later. I don't know. No, yeah. It costs some money to go to the state fair. It's actually cheap, you know, the county fairs don't even charge actually. And they don't charge for parking. I mean, you can just roll your truck right in there and go in. State fair is expensive. I mean, the tickets are what, $15 a pop? 17. Ooh, used to be 10 not so long ago. It's expensive to bring your family to the state fair, agreed. And also everything costs so much to eat and the parking. So the state fair does its own research and it skews definitely higher income. Okay. And the other thing is that the representation, at least, I don't know about the race and ethnic distribution fair-wide because they don't collect that information. But from the building, we also do not have we do not have equivalent percent African American and Hispanic is good. It's African American and Southeast Asian, I think, are lower for our D2D enrollees than would be metro specific population level. Because we don't know about the people who come in the building, we don't really know, but Annie, wanna?
There is an old document, but it's over 5 years old of the race ethnicity breakdown from the fair, so it's not up to date. But when that was published, when I was able to find it online, we tracked along with the state fair attendance. But you know, like I say, it's old now. The other thing that is a little bit of a difference is, you know, the maroon and gold branding attracts people to the building who tend to have higher education. And that's another critique that people will say about D2D. But, you know, when you're talking about your pilot data, like you can get 200 folks in a shift, like, you know, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good time.
Hey, Ruby?
So we're going over, but I do have a question if you can take it, Ellen. And that is so many fantastic projects. It's Isabel Ricky's project that we'll be implementing this summer. And I'm very excited. And it's so great to watch our students in action. So that's a sense of pride for me too. So having said that, what success have projects had in obtaining federal funding for their work?
So I don't know, Annie, if you want to take that. We have a number of investigators who have gotten RO1s off of their pilot projects. I know in nursing, I don't have all of those numbers with me, but they have.
Funded projects to be run through D2D.
Oh, run through D2D. Well, you know, I mean, the 10,000 families has run there.
It reviewed very well for 10,000 families. Sorry, I have to talk on Zoom, but when because we had fair enrollment as our enrollment strategy for the UG3 and it went over very well.
Thanks, Heather. Okay, well, I think that's about it. Thank you everyone for coming. Yeah.